Welcome to the Teachers Pep Rally. If you missed our last episode, we had our annual conversation for CyberSecurity Awareness Month with Evelyn McCulloch and Mike Rinyi from iTech. Please go back and check it out. And while you're there, leave us a review. We value you and these conversations. Well, our guest today is currently an academic advisor at the University of Washington in Tacoma. She has experience as an international program coordinator and worked for EF Educational Tours, leading American students on tours across Europe. Can't wait to hear more about that. Her love for exploring only adds to her belief that the whole student is important and everyone should feel they've been able to tell their story and bring their authenticity and their culture to their school. Let's talk about life and learning. Please welcome to the Teachers Pep Rally, Isabella Webb. Woohoo!
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Isabella. We're so excited to have you on. This conversation can go in so many ways, so let's just have a little bit of fun. But before we do that, we've got a new thing, Isabella, that we've started doing. It's just kind of a quick little thing to get us in a certain mind frame. Letitia, do you want to share what that is?
Absolutely. So, Isabella, we've started doing something called Happy Happenings, where we basically share with each other and our listeners some of the things that have happened this week that put a smile on our face, made us laugh, made us grateful, just our way of kind of putting some positivity out in the world. So you are more than welcome to participate, and we will go round robin. And today I will start with Erin, since Fred is not here.
I'll go first.
You go first.
Yeah, so Fred's not here, unfortunately. We miss Fred. Everything's okay. He just, double booked, couldn't make it. So I'm going to say one is he shared the pictures from his daughter's wedding that happened about a week ago to us. And that made me very, very happy. And then the other thing I'll just say real quickly is we had friends staying with us over the weekend for a family event. And it was just so nice to have people staying at the house and waking up in the morning in our jammies, drinking coffee and catching up. And it was just kind of just a simple but sweet event. So there you have it.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. You gave us two this week. I will share. So this week, like you, Erin, I have two. And I know you're probably going to die laughing when I say this, but last week's show, we were so inspired. And we had a little show's outtake where we all met together at the end of the show, just connecting. And I got such a belly laugh. I was literally crying. And after we hung up, I was like, that was awesome. And it kind of inspired me to just find humor all week. So thank you guys for that after show belly laugh. That was awesome.
We need to keep recording sometimes.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And I actually went out on Sunday for breakfast and a movie. And although those things were awesome, I think the thing that made me happy is that my anxiety level about being in public was a lot lower. It's taken me a while, guys, to kind of acclimate to large crowds and all of that. So I was like, hey, anxiety didn't rear its ugly little head during my outing this Sunday. So that was a happy happening.
That's good.
Pete, what you got for us?
All right, fasten your seatbelt. I went to a professional learning seminar and I got something out of it.
Oh,
I went and I got something.
Happy happening.
I got something good out of professional development session. And another music teacher shared this app with us. And Isabel, I'm a music teacher at elementary school. And a friend of mine shared us this app. You guys need to look up this app. It's called Novel Effect. Novel Effect. It has, I don't know, hundreds of books.
Oh
and
gosh.
As you read the book, it will provide a soundscape for you as you read it. It will be in sync with what you're reading. So if you're doing a picture book with the kids, I know they just released a chapter 1 of Harry Potter. Even as you're reading it, sound effects and music. And the thing is, the app tracks your voice. So if you stop and you'd be like, okay, Johnny, sit down. No, you can't go to the bathroom. Whatever's going on, it will wait for you. And then it follows you as you read the book. And I did it with classes all this week. did some Halloween, Casey at the Bat for World Series, Leaf Man for the fall. And I put Bluetooth speakers all around their music room without the kids knowing. And I'm doing Leaf Man, and they hear the rustling of leaves all around them. They were like Pocahontas, and coolest app. It's expensive, but I feel it's worth every penny. So teachers out there, look it up. It's a really, really great app. It's a wonderful resource. And for babysitters, whoever's just working with kids and you just want to do almost like a 4D version of a book, it's amazing. Check it out. Novel Effect.
Awesome.
If they want to sponsor us, jump right in. Novel Effect, you can sponsor us. There we go.
That is awesome. Thank you for sharing. And hopefully that'll be someone's happy happening out there this week.
Let us know.
That app. Yeah, let us know. So Isabella, we've saved the best for last. Any happy happenings you want to share with us?
All right. I'm going to cheat and give two. Just literally right before I started this podcast, my son came into the house and said to me, because he'd just come from the dentist, he's 15, and he said, I had no cavities. How that happened has to be a miracle of God, because, for the last 2-3 years, I feel like his diet consisted only of sugar. And then my other happy happening, his twin sister actually has she was diagnosed with dyslexia in the 1st grade. And I'm not sure if a lot of people realize, but, dyslexia doesn't just affect your learning, it can also affect you in sports. And so she is one of the most focused and diligent people I know, and volleyball has become something of a passion for her. So she just wrapped up her 1st season in the 9th grade on the school's volleyball team, and I got to go and see her last game last night, and I was just so impressed with what a little warrior she is. And I was very impressed. I'm like, who's your mother?
It's you.
I love it. That would be me. I love it. Thank you for sharing a little peek into the life of your life and the life of your children. That is awesome. Well, I think, Aaron, our listeners are in for a treat, because reading up on Isabella, I felt like my passport was stamped many, many, many times. So I hand it back to you, and let's get the show started.
Yeah, I'm so excited about this. So Isabella, I don't know how it happened. Well, I do. I was taking a Yale course with women from all over the world. And I think that there were some people from your university where you teach that were in my class. And so I was checking out the school, and an article popped up that was written about you. And in the minute I read the article, it was called Guiding the Way Forward. I was like, we have to get this person on the Teachers Pep Rally. So before we kind of dive in about that article and what was saying, I was hoping maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you do at the University of Washington, Tacoma.
Absolutely. So, well, I do a lot of things, actually. So first and foremost, I am an academic advisor, and I'm in university academic advising. So I work predominantly with all of the pre-major students. So we get a lot of the freshmen, sophomores, juniors, very rarely the seniors, sometimes if they're changing their major. We do work with caseloads, and I also am affiliate faculty. So I teach a freshman pre-major success course where we kind of get to explore, why are you here? What's your passion? What's your skill? How do we connect your degree to your career? But we also get to dive into that identity exploration as well. In addition to that, I also lead Husky Success Series, which is a group that really does educational workshops. It's a little different in that it is predominantly student-led, and we bring together student leaders from across campus, because who better than students to really understand what kind of programming their peers are looking for.
I love that you kept using the word exploration, because that was one of the reasons why I was attracted to having this conversation with you, because last year we all picked some words. I guess we did this year, but Letitia's, I remember yours last year. One of the big things you said was you wanted to explore more. You wanted to find the fun and the joy in life doing that. So it's exciting to hear Isabella's doing that with students on a college campus. Yeah,
I agree.
You agree.
I agree, and can't believe that you remember my word.
Oh, you're in shock because I remembered your word.
You remembered my word.
Yes, I remembered your word. So Isabella, this article I mentioned, it's called Guiding the Way Forward. Do you mind telling us your story? Because it tells a little bit about from when you're a young child and why this idea, I think, of exploration has been a part of your life. I think it started very young. Do you mind telling us a little bit about that?
Sure. I think being Australian, we all have the spirit of exploration. And I don't know if it's just in the water that we drink, or if it's, if it's because Australia is at the very bottom of the world. But it's just very common for Australians to just explore, leave home at a young age, and you can literally find an Australian person anywhere in the world. I remember being 7, sitting at a bus stop. It was a rainy day. That's why I remember it, right? Because it's Australia.
Yeah.
We don't have, a lot of rainy days. And just thinking, I just had this obsession from a young age with the horizon. What's on the other side? Where can I go? I just always wanted to go, and I like to say, on a bit of a walkabout, just being Indigenous myself. And even before I really understood what a walkabout meant, that was just really how I was positioning myself and how I wanted to live my life. And when I was 7, I just had this epiphany that I knew I was going to travel the world, and I knew I wanted to go to university, and I knew I wanted to become a professor. So this was at 7 that I just really knew where my life was taking me. Now, growing up in Australia, being Indigenous, I really came out of an era of the stolen generation. And that is just kind of just a very tragic part of Australia's history. It extended for many, many years where children, typically from one Aboriginal parent, one white parent, were forcibly removed and sent off to live with orphanages. To this day, there really is this generation of people who did not know where they came from. Some did not even know about their Aboriginal heritage. And so I really came up on the very, very back end of that. And I think there was a real suspicion in my family, we don't want this to happen, so hide your identity. So I spent a good portion of my childhood and even my adulthood, I think, kind of shying away from my identity. It wasn't until I really began to travel, meet people from around the world, go through my own educational process, because I always say that education is transformative and it's healing, that I was kind of able to come full circle and put all of these pieces together to understand how my journey really related to me and how it connected. So I just really look at my journey from being 7 to kind of traveling the world, getting my master's degree, and then working with university students to understand. It all makes sense now. You have that aha moment, but when you're in the thick of it, you don't really understand where you're going, and maybe you don't understand. There's nothing illuminating your path. So the article really just talks about kind of that progression and that journey.
Yeah.
And I just love, I'm sorry, Erin, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
here.
go ahead, please.
I think, Isabella, you're having you on and just reading that article got me super excited, because it was great to see where you and our lives have intersected, even though we just met, right? And I think that's the beauty of storytelling, that it kind of brings us together, right? To me, I feel like storytelling is like sharing a great meal, where we're all sitting at the table and learning from one another. And I was like, imposter syndrome, I know about that, and so it was really exciting to see, Isabella, how you've really woven your struggles with identity and kind of really coming to your own and embracing your heritage and your story. And you've traveled a lot. I'm curious though, Isabella, in your travels and in just flushing out your own story, have you noticed any common threads with all of the different places you've gone and people that you've shared your story or they've shared theirs with you?
Well, there's so many.
I'm sure.
I don't know how I could list them all today. The biggest thing is the concept of being other. I really did not experience, you come to the United States and you have to check a million boxes. Well, what are you? And, what if you're more than one thing? And now I think I see popping up 2 or more races. What really happened for me was, after a while, the uncomfortable space of checking other became a real part of my identity. So when I talk to a lot of people from around the world, indigenous cultures, students of color, and I say the word other, it's almost like this safe space in between two cultures where you can feel kind of legitimate in who you are. And so that, I would say, is really the thread that connects us all, because in a way we all are other. Nobody is just one thing.
And I'm so glad that you shared that. And I'm going to be super transparent, Isabella, and I know that our listeners are used to this. I actually did an ancestry a couple of years back, and I actually pulled it up just to be reminded, because I am an other. And so listen up, guys. So the number 1 was Spain. Number 2 was Portugal. 3 was Cameroon, Congo, and the Bantu people. And the 4th was Nigeria. So those were my top 4. And Isabella, my family's originally from Puerto Rico. And so, you know, I don't know, just looking at that today just really reminded me the power in being other.
I love that. You know, really, my passion is that lived experience and that self-narrative. That is really the power of storytelling. And, you know, I wish we had longer than today. I feel like we might have to do like a part 2 or part 3. But when you think about how people are connected, you know, they're connected through their language, they're connected through their cultures. And so one project I did, because I always knew that I was Aboriginal, and it just came to mind because you were talking about doing the DNA. And so for a project, I decided to see how well I could chart my Aboriginal heritage. Because, you know, when Australia was colonized, people were really just kind of dispersed all across Australia. And a lot of that language and a lot of that history was lost. And so I actually began the project by doing a DNA test. And it's interesting because it doesn't really say Aboriginal. It gives kind of this other designation and says 50%, and then it just gives this location in Australia, which surprised me because it's literally to the T where I'm from. And so then I kind of expanded that to family, folklore, history, you know, the stories that are kind of passed down from generation to generation. I looked up World War I and II military records, did a lot of historical searches in those areas, and just kind of used just a lot of different information to cross-reference and really come down to very like as close as you can get all of these generations later, you know, to what particular tribe my family may have been from. But the thing that was really rewarding to me is that in my region, people say barramundi for an Australian fish, and it's actually an Aboriginal word. And I've been using this my whole entire life. And I thought to myself, well, you know what, without even realizing it, you were even just a little bit speaking your language. Because that is really the way we connect with our culture, is through language. And, you know, what if that land is lost? What if that language is lost? It's just also interconnected. And I might have taken us on a different path with that, but I was just kind of going off of what you were saying.
Absolutely. No worries. That's how we do here at TPR. Get off the beaten path. Get off the beaten path.
I love that you mentioned that, because I grew up with a father who was in the Navy, lived in many different places, including New Zealand, at a young age. And then ended up back in the States when my dad started flying for commercial airlines, which is, you had asked earlier before we started recording how I ended up in Atlanta. And that's why, because my dad flew for Delta at that point after the military, which Atlanta is the major hub for that. But I was very privileged to have a dad who flew around the world, because a lot of times he would take me, my sister, and my brother, because he wanted us to explore and to learn about different cultures, try different foods, even learn a little bit of the language and try to speak in their language versus English when you sit down to order, because that would be respectful. And the stories, Isabella, that I used to get from people, even just sitting at a table and trying to order, and then a lot of times, oh, where are you from? And they would save me from trying to use the language, but I loved it so much in trying and meeting different people. I'm trying to think about what that must be like when you work with your students and them having an opportunity to share their story, things about the pride of their culture and their food. What are some of the things that you try to do to make those connections with them?
Well, the first thing I I find that I have to do quite often is explain to people where Australia is, the fact that it's not an island, and that it's a continent really almost the size of the United States. And then also people tend to get it really confused with Austria.
Mhm.
So I often get
Oh.
the questions about Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Oh no.
To which I have to reply, well, it's two different countries, really on two different sides of the earth. I've worked so much with international students when I was doing short-term programs, and I really became a master, I would say, at picking people up at the airport. Sometimes it would be groups of like 40 to 50 students, and sometimes, English is not the first language, so they might have very limited English speaking skills. They'd be very nervous. And right off the bat, and I'll say this to anyone, and I know you'll know this saying, but a smile is worth 1,000 words. You
Mhm.
can connect with so many people just by smiling, and you can emote so much about yourself, your experiences, who you are as a person. And I've worked for such a long time with international students, both here and abroad, and every time that's really my go-to. It's that key piece, because you may not have the language to communicate, but you can still express who you are in so many other ways.
I'm going to take a little sidestep since you brought that up. The tour group that you used to work for is a major one here in Atlanta. I know the high school that I was teaching at, that's where they would use that program to take the kids overseas. So do you real quickly have, I'm sure you have a ton, but one particular favorite story of taking some students across Europe or wherever overseas that you could share with us?
I mean, I have a lot of stories.
I figured, yeah, I was like, this could be a hard question, but if there's one that you just tend to love to tell, I'd love to hear it.
Well, I've seen both sides of the fence, because I've really had students come to the US that were from Denmark, China, Korea, Japan, Taiwan. Now, when I was in Europe, I worked with students who were coming from the US. I think one thing that always happened, especially I used to do Rome to Paris to London for 11 days. So it would be 50 students on the road for 11 days. And just about anything that could go wrong would go wrong. Inevitably in Rome, somebody would get pickpocketed. Somebody would meet a cute Italian boy or girl and get lost because they would fall in love under the Trevi Fountain. Numerous conversations of, okay, I don't want you to betray any of your friends, but we just need to know where they are. Just tell them to meet us here at this time.
Oh boy.
And it was just interesting because trip after trip, the cultural experiences were very, very similar. The way that people experienced Italy versus the way that they experienced Paris versus when we would get to London, and everybody was pretty bold and brave at that point and kind of taking off on their own and doing their own exploration, as opposed to when they first arrived in Italy and, they were kind of very scared just to really go anywhere or have that experience. But I would say falling in love in Italy. I've seen it with my students. I lived in Italy for such a long time. I've seen it with my friends. Everybody goes to Italy and falls in love. And that's the best way, they say,
It's
to
gotta
learn
happen.
the Italian language.
My sister
Hard.
married an Italian, so it's literally from Italy, not, yeah. So I've seen it in my own home.
Isabella, I'd love to keep talking about your experience with your students and all. Early on, you mentioned the Husky Success Series. I'd love for other school districts to hear about those programs. Tell us a little bit about it. What makes them so successful?
Mm-hmm. Well, sure. So when I took over Husky Success Series, I really drew on my international background, which is student-led programming. It's the strongest kind of programming you can do because students they really relate to each other. You know, they want to come, they want to meet other students, they want to hang out with other students, and they have their finger on the pulse. They know what's going to make programming fun. I really believe that no matter what you're teaching, you know, whether you are talking about time management, how to choose your degree, how to register, you can make it fun. And so really the two key concepts we started with were bringing in student leaders from across campus, and then how to make this programming fun. Oftentimes, when you have students that work in different departments, they don't intersect with each other. Now, on the staff side, there's really been a push for kind of, you know, cross-campus partnerships. And I thought, well, why don't we have this with student leaders? You know, it also creates opportunities for student leaders to really get that experience, to put that on their resume. But then we would take programming and we would kind of put a spin on things. So we would have Take Care Tuesdays, which was all about just kind of like your health and wellness and how can we have programming that's fun. So whether that's coming in and engaging in some artwork, bringing in some animals for therapy, having other departments come in, it was just about what are you doing this week that feels kind of nurturing to you. We did a lot of partnerships with really celebrating culture, kind of focusing on that story piece, especially in university, a lot of, well, how are you communicating? What's your lived experience? How are you bringing in to your education? Because I believe that like your cultural identity and your academic identity should be the same thing. And historically, I think we were all told, please leave your cultural identity at the door. Well, that just doesn't work. And we're missing out on such a rich tapestry if we do that. We also looked into kind of grouping majors and minors together. So if we would do, for example, an open mic where people could come and showcase their poetry, artwork that they had done, graphics, they could sing, they could play a guitar. And we really brought that kind of with a focus to, well, what are the really creative majors that you can get into and how can these connect to your career? So it's a lot of like, I would say it's a lot of scaffolding, right? Which most teachers are familiar with, but it's the fun scaffolding, which is the really key piece. How do you get people in the door? How do you get them to stay? How is it fun? And then you're just kind of sliding in that educational piece underneath.
That's great, because it sounds like you are having everyone just get comfortable. Letitia mentioned at the beginning, you know, storytelling is like everyone sitting at the table, you know, it's like sharing a meal with each other. So what I kept hearing are opportunities for the students to collaborate, get to know each other a little bit more. And then the more they become familiar with each other, then you can start feeling a little bit maybe more comfortable with reading your poetry or playing a song or sharing a story about you or your family. I absolutely love that. I hope that other people pick that up and use it for sure.
Well, you can get as creative as you want. We actually did a cooking segment where I wouldn't say it was a cook-off, but we had one American student come in and make their favorite dish. And we had one international student come in and make their favorite dish, and people could follow along. And so that way it was really relatable. I think when you do creative programming, the sky's the limit. As much as you can think outside of the box, people love it. And then you also get the student buy-in because it's a chance for students to pick up skills, take leadership in ways that they never thought they could before. So for those students that love to be in the back row or never want to volunteer for anything, this is a really great way for them to kind of step up and feel confident in their abilities because it's all about that FUN and everybody knows how to do that. You can incorporate, you know, that cultural programming to where everybody feels comfortable. But what you're really doing is teaching students how to communicate with each other, how to have those conversations by creating those intimate spaces and sharing their stories. So it's a simple mechanism in which you really achieve so much.
And you know, as you were sharing, Isabella, I just keep going back to this idea that, you know, your academics and your cultural identity should really be developed and grown in a university or college setting. You know, I'm kind of thinking about my own experience, and unfortunately, I was usually the only one or very few people that look like me. So I love that you're creating this safe environment at your university for students to not only grow as leaders, right, but also become so comfortable in their identity, because after school they'll have to be in these, environments. How do you get your students to really, or empower them to really start shaping their story and actually wanting to share it, if at all?
That's like a really great question. I share my story. As an educator, you can talk about imposter syndrome all day long, but until you've experienced it, you just really don't know what it means. For me, I did not experience it until I was doing my master's. I thought to myself, I struggled with coming up with what I wanted to do for my thesis. Deep down inside, I wanted to write about being Aboriginal, but because I'm half Aboriginal, I felt like I wasn't legitimate enough. So that was the first hurdle. I had just wonderful professors who were very supportive. A couple of quarters before that, Professor Jarek Sinochinsky, and I'm sorry if I'm saying his name wrong, he just had this wonderful way of, he really focused on, how do we just break down these barriers? How do we break down the power dynamic? I want you to come in and teach this class today. And he gave us amazing books to read. And that was just kind of the start of the journey for me. So Borderlands by Gloria Anzaldúa. And she really talks about the journey as a Chicana, a lesbian, an activist, a writer, through essays and poems. So this really started me thinking about that journey. And he had said to me one day, well, what are your identities? And do they come from a place of power, or do they come from a place of shame? And I just felt like I had been stripped down naked in the classroom, because I have been hiding my identity for pretty much my entire life. So when I started my journey in writing my thesis, there were so many days that I just was literally crying on the floor, and my children saw me crying on the floor, and I was like, I can't do this. I'm not smart enough for you. And they just were like, hang in there, hang in there. And I had this wonderful professor, Dr. Janelle Franco. She teaches at the University of Washington and UCLA. And she said, you know what? I think there's someone I want you to speak to. So she connected me with Dr. Jacqueline Duarte, who does a lot of work in Australia with linguistics, languaging, translanguaging, identity, K through 12. And she said, I really feel like you just need to connect, with someone in Australia. So this was during COVID. We set up a Zoom, me in America, Dr. Duarte in Australia. And she basically, the first thing she said to me was, well, you're going to do your PhD, right? And I thought to myself, hell no, I'm crying here about my master's thesis. And she said, listen, how many Aboriginal women are out there traveling the world? And I said, well, really, probably not many. In all of my journeys, I've never met another Aboriginal person. She said, how many Aboriginal women are working in a university? I said, well, I don't know the statistics, but she said, well, I can tell you because I'm here in Australia, not many. And then she said, how many Aboriginal women are writing a thesis? How many Aboriginal women are teaching as a professor? How many Aboriginal women have their PhD? And then she said, how much trouble have you had when researching your thesis in finding Indigenous scholars? And it just was an eye-opening moment where she said, you're in the 1%. Stop crying. Pick yourself up from the floor. Think about who is coming after you and what you can do for them. Little children in schools, people who are researching this topic. You owe it to yourself and your community to contribute in any way that you can. It changed my life forever. And now I'm able to bring that experience to my students. And when you share your journey, it's just powerful.
You're reminding me, Isabella, of a class I took at Georgia State last year. And one of the courses we had to take, I was sitting here as I was listening to your story. First of all, it was making me think we all need those people in our lives. And sometimes they're strangers, to remind us of all the amazing things that we've done or we're doing, because a lot of times it's hard for us to see it in ourselves. But second, this culture class I took, everyone in the class had to put together a 15-minute presentation about their culture, what makes them. So it was really, really fascinating, because we had people from all over with all kinds of different backgrounds. People shared their favorite foods, where they were from, the struggles of their ancestors, their history of their family, beautiful stories of their parents, coming over to the United States so that their children could, have a better life than they did, because their country was in war at the time. And it just, at the end of it, it was almost exhausting, but in a beautiful way, because every time we had class, about 3 people would present, and it just reminded, at least for me, how beautiful the world is. And to have that time and space to just hear from my peers about where they're from and what makes them who they are, or what are the things they're most proud about or appreciate about their culture, was just an amazing thing. So you're reminding me that's something I need to do more often with students, is open up that space to allow them to truly share what they are proud of, and where they come from, what they've done, and even where they like to go.
I love that. And I want to go take this class. I want to have this experience.
Yes. I will give you the professor's name. He's amazing. He actually probably would really love to speak with you, but I'll also send you the assignment, because it's really cool, and feel free to edit or do whatever you want with it.
Yeah, I would love to do that. One of the things I do with my students is we do a linguistics map or an infographic, where students really get to present their identities in the way that they want to tell their story. And, some students will talk about who they were as a child, who they were as a teenager, and now who they are as a college student. Some people will do it geographically. They'll connect it through language and culture, skills that they've picked up along the way. Some people will connect kind of those really salient identities. So, how are they identifying with their sexual orientation? Are they a mother, a daughter, they, them? And it just really gives people a creative way to tell their story, but also to look at it from a different perspective and to realize how important these identities are. Storytelling for me is where you always start. When you think about it, just for thousands and thousands of centuries, storytelling is how information was passed down from one generation to the next. It's very intuitive. It's a part of who we are. It is the toolkit, I would say, really for Indigenous people as well. And so if you can't communicate through storytelling, I think I said to someone once that storytelling is like the air that we breathe. Without the oxygen, how are we even existing? And I think when you do storytelling, you knock down those barriers, but what you're doing is even in a classroom, you're creating that sense of a tribe. Okay, now we've done that. Let's get to the pre-calc. There's more of a buy-in, right?
Absolutely.
I love that.
Oh my God.
So Isabella, before the work that I'm doing now, part of my first love is teaching. I was a teacher for many years, still am a teacher in a different way. But I remember every year at the start of the year, and I've shared this before, I would always share the story with my students on how I learned how to ride a bike. I mean, this is like day one. I learned how to ride a bike. Of course, I gave them all the details, but basically my younger brother chased me with a dead squirrel. And that's how I ride a bike. But that story, telling that story and, describing the heat in New York and the fire hydrant going, just getting so into this story, it built such a culture in the classroom, a foundation. To your point, Isabella, our tribe, kind of gathered around to hear this story. And then the kids would share, funny stories and things. And storytelling just connects you. And, I don't want to get political, but I feel like the more we share our stories, this hate that we're feeling, this political tension, It's almost a responsibility to tell our story, to drown out all of the negativity, because when you tell a story, I just feel like we get to see the commonalities and then honor and celebrate the differences as well. So, this storytelling is extremely powerful. So, Isabella, thank you for that work. I'm loving it.
Oh, yes, no problem. And I will say, I know we don't have time to go into it today, but when I write about storytelling, I lightly touch on, because it's such a big topic, but critical race theory, when you look at storytelling, specifically the majoritarian storytelling, and people, often think, well, storytelling is just about, maybe it's about your culture and maybe it's about your history. But there is the darker side, which is that majoritarian storytelling. When I was doing research, I was looking at my experience. I was looking at experiences of other Indigenous students in Australia. And then I came across a documentary that was filmed, I want to say in 2021. It was by the BBC, and they were following around a little Aboriginal boy in Australia. And they're sitting in class with him one day, and the teacher says, okay, everyone, I want you to pay attention because this is the most important information you'll hear. And then the teacher proceeds to talk about the discovery of Australia by Captain Cook. And there's this moment where this little boy just kind of looks at the documentarian and he says, but that's not my history. That's not the history of the Aboriginal people. And the person on the documentary says, what is it like to have your whole history erased? Right? This is a story that around the world we can all identify with. But for me, just making that connection and saying, if you look from generation to generation to generation, that majoritarian storytelling is still very present. And we can combat that through sharing our lived experience, through sharing our self-narrative, and really embracing the storytelling as a tool to do that. And I know that's a meatier, deeper topic than we have time for today, but I thought that might also just be a good way to kind of just also make that connection and bring what we're talking about full circle.
Absolutely. And maybe we can have you come back at another time and really dig even deeper into it. So I think you're going to love this, Isabella. We started, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago, asking our guest in a way to tell a story. And this is one of my favorite times of the conversation. Is there a teacher, mentor, coach, someone, from your past that, gave you a spark? You already kind of shared one story of a teacher, but do you have another one of someone that you'd love to tell us about, to shout out?
It's really funny. I would say the people who really have inspired me were definitely in my graduate studies. In my bachelor's, Professor Marilyn Vital, she was the first time that I had really experienced a professor, a woman of color. And she kind of poked and prodded, I think, and kind of started to make me think critically and outside the box about things. But I'm going to take this in a really different direction and say probably the earliest person that inspired me was actually my second grade teacher, who I did not like. And the reason I'm telling this story is because I had won the spelling bee, and the person who was the runner-up cried, and they gave the win to her. And for years, it was this thorn in my side. It's still a thorn in my side. I feel like I need to go back to Australia. I need to go back to that second grade classroom and claim that victory. But we tell our students this, that sometimes the people who inspire you the most, or who can light that spark, are the ones who maybe presented that challenge for you. That moment of injustice, or that moment that you didn't succeed, that sometimes can fuel you and you can take a negative and turn it into a positive.
That is so true. Very well said. Thank you for sharing that. So we're going to just share a little bit, and I don't know about you all, but I took so many notes while Isabella was talking. Isabella, we're just going to each kind of give a little bit of our inspiration or thought or something that we're taking away from our conversation with you. And then you as our guest kind of get the last word. Does that sound okay?
That sounds great.
Okay, great. Pete, I'm going to let you go first.
Oh my gosh. I was writing something down. I said, oh wait, this one's good. And I was writing, so there's another one. I have a lot here. How about, the recipe for success, undeniable, any situation you could think of, to make people feel safe and to grow from there and to find success is the combination of starting with a smile, having an outlet for creativity, which is my whole platform, art or poetry or music, and then also food, the breaking of bread, the sharing of food. You have all those elements into one room. It doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter who you are. I promise at the end of the conversation, the end of the time together, there's going to be a lot more in common than not. So I think that's just such a remarkable and so easy, yet it seems so important elsewhere in the world. It's so frustrating, and here in our country. And I love what Letitia said. The power in being other is brilliant. Absolutely love it. Totally get it. Love it. And storytelling is the air we breathe. I think that's the umbrella for me tonight. That's remarkable. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Isabella. Really great stuff.
Thank you.
And go ahead, Letitia.
Why am I still writing? Okay. Well, Isabella, you almost made me cry today.
Oh, yes. That was my goal.
Yeah, you did it, my friend. You did it. And so I think for me, like the rest of us, so many rich things that you've said. I'm going to grab a quote from the Guiding the Way Forward article where you mentioned, and you even touched on it tonight, that education should be a transformative experience. Education should be a transformative experience. And that touched me so, because I'd like to think that that's what I did for my students, but I want to encourage our listeners that part of that transformation is really providing our students with a safe space to share their story. You know, celebrating our culture and our identity should not be, you know, I remember as an elementary school teacher, one time a year, we had that international night where everybody gets together and gets to share. And those were really nice, right? But I think every day being intentional about allowing our students to share their identity, to share their stories in one way or the other. And that can be as powerful as pronouns. And I know that's such a hot topic now, but I think just so important. So thank you, my new friends, for reminding us of the transformative power of education. And then as a woman of color, you reminded me tonight that it is my responsibility to tell my story. So when imposter syndrome tries to sneak in, I have to remind myself that telling my story is a responsibility. And you shall be back. This is a series.
Yes, this will turn into the web series. We'll call it the web series.
Web series. I love it.
No, I love that. That is brilliant.
Thank you. Copyright it. All right. So I did the same thing, Letitia. I wrote down a lot, but the main one that I love so much: education should be transformative or transformational and healing. Healing. And then I'll add to that too, Isabella, you said it's all about that FUN. And of course, my dyslexia had to take a minute, and I looked at the subtitles and I was like, oh, she said fun. Yes. So it should be fun. And I think when we create those spaces, we create the opportunity, like Pete was saying, to break bread together, feel like family, which hopefully we do here, I feel like, and we try to bring as many people as we can to come on and tell their stories. So Isabella, thank you so much for coming on and doing that. I cannot thank you enough. And if there's any last words of wisdom or any little piece of thing that you'd like to share with us, it's your turn.
Ooh, I'm up. Well, you know, we did say this off the air, but I'll say it on the air so it goes down. I said I'd love to come back and interview all of you. From we're going to do an Australian interview.
That would be awesome.
We would love that.
Because I think your viewers want to know who you are. What's your story? What's your passion? Because you tell everyone else's story, but what is the story of the storyteller?
Yes.
You are right. You literally have called us out, and you're right. Let's do it.
I love it. And then let's see. I'm just going to end with this. At the end of my research, I noted down, because they asked me, well, what have you taken away from this? And I said, I've come to understand myself as a storyteller and an educator. And if that's what I'm known for being a storyteller, I thought, how wonderful is that? But it really allowed me to kind of develop a deep reverence and respect for the storytellers who came before me. And in that way, I felt like I had finally found what my cultural and my spiritual destiny was. And then my positionality, as an Indigenous person, as a student, a scholar, an educator, all of those things, because we are always students of life, or we should be. I think the moment that we stop learning, we may as well call it quits at that point and just leave the room, right?
Could not agree more. Could not agree more. Well, we see you, Isabella, and we're so thankful that you continue to tell the stories and help others do it as well. If our listeners want to reach out and connect with you, how can they reach you?
Do you have a chat, or do you have, when you publish this, do you pop something in there?
We do. Yeah. So, Pete, you want to, that's a great time for you to mention how people can find us, and then Isabella can kind of hear if people want to comment or reach out.
So we have our Facebook group. We're on Instagram. Our episodes are wherever you're hearing it right now, MP3, and also on YouTube. And our website's teacherpeprally.com.
Perfect. So then, Pete, if I get you my work email and just formal means of communication, then you can get that out to everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll do
right.
it. Well, thank you so much, Isabella, for coming on. We really, really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll be, sounds like, setting up some future
times.
Yes.
When I'm not getting over a cold and I don't sound like I'm like running a marathon as I'm speaking, I'm like, oh, girl, you just out of breath.
Your accent, I could listen to you all day. You're good.
Yeah.
Well, I just love that we've made this connection. Like, I know 3 people now on the East Coast that I did not know before. I love that.
That's great.
Come visit us anytime. You're always welcome.
Oh, I'll take you up on that.
Okay, good. Good.
All right. Well, bye, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Isabella.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.